Welcome to the Cyber-A podcast, the place where we discuss all things cybersecurity and GRC. I am Richard Perry, your cybersecurity and GRC enthusiast. The aim of this podcast is to provide a meaningful value-added platform via which upcoming cybersecurity professionals like yourself can gain insights from various topics covering cybersecurity and GRC that will enable them to become professionals that the industry demands. Stay tuned for what next on the Cyber-A podcast. Leveraging 25 plus years experience as a cybersecurity expert, a global security executive, we are joined by Robin Harris Walker, CEO of Applied Cyber Strategy Group. Robin, thanks for accepting the invitation to be with us on Cyber-A today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I enjoy it. Every time we're together, I enjoy it. So it's my privilege to be on the podcast with you.
Awesome. And I definitely look forward to all the valuable insights that you will be sharing with us today, especially with providing that level of guidance for upcoming cybersecurity professionals who are definitely looking for that level of guidance as it relates to, in many occasions, trying to seek to find their path to their passion, as they would say within the industry. So when I actually look at your overall profile, I mean, it beautifully sums up your career in terms of experience. You're talking about roles and your unique skill sets. So where and how did this journey into cybersecurity started?
You know, it's so funny. I actually started my career as a writer. I was an international trade writer and reporter, and I used to cover stories on international trade in Washington. And it got boring. And one time I was sitting at my desk, and we had these old DOS-based machines. They were called ATEX machines. And if they went wrong, you had to call the help desk, and it was a whole ordeal. So a help desk technician came to my office. He opened my computer. He did something, and it took about 30 seconds. And when he left, my machine was lightning fast and it was perfect. And I said, well, what did you do? And the gentleman said to me, well, you wouldn't understand. Just know that it's fixed. And I thought to myself, wow, first I thought that was mean, but then I said, well, maybe I should understand a little better. But that piqued my curiosity about IT. So I went back to school and I got a degree in information systems management. I went to a 6-month program. It was actually a certificate program. It wasn't even a degree program at that time. So it was a 9 or 6 month certificate. So I began to understand all about IT. And I said, well, wait a minute. They say IT jobs, they pay well. So initially, I went into this field of IT, learning. My first job was a help desk technician. Then I went to work on systems. I was a Microsoft systems engineer. So I began to evolve into network operations. And then I began to work on routers and switches. So over the course of my career, I worked on short-term contracts. Those short-term contracts were 6 to 12 months, but each time I moved, I learned a new skill set. And during each time, I said, I need to narrow in on all these technologies that I've learned over these past years. So this was in 1996. And in 1999, I found that I really enjoyed security. So back then, you had a few firewall products that were really popular. And I began to work because I was really good at routing and switching, and I understood networking really well. I was Cisco certified. So I was good at that. And I knew that was the foundation to be effective in cybersecurity. So I began to work on firewalls. And I said, you know what? I like cybersecurity. So I began to learn everything I could about firewalls, everything I could about intrusion detection systems. And then, so I had a really technical career early on. And over the years, I began to look at different threats that were happening. And so how do we begin to prevent these threats instead of always being reactive? So that approach for me was to work with organizations that were looking to balance the reactive response to a cyber threat or an attack with a proactive approach to saying, let's make sure that we're in a good position before we have to respond. So that's where I started to focus on compliance. And my background is pretty unique because I also went into guard force services. So I had a guard services company. So I did industrial security. So I was a certified protection professional. So mirroring that with cybersecurity, I saw the full breadth of cybersecurity, and I saw it involved in how cameras, video surveillance cameras, begin to converge with cybersecurity. So as I learned that, I taught that to physical security professionals. And it's just been, I would say, an upward battle ever since then. But now I pretty much have landed in governance, risk, and compliance, because that gives me and my clients the opportunity to get ahead of some of the threats that are inevitable, but at least they're prepared for them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, as you spoke about your journey in terms of the how it is that you have actually started, I actually started reflecting. I mean, my background is somewhat similar, coming from a technical background.
Okay.
Which in fire, I was super, super passionate about technical stuff.
Yes.
I enjoyed looking at the switches lighting up. I would be amused in those labs, looking at those blade servers just making those sounds and those
Yeah.
lights. And at times persons might think that he's so nerdy or something, but they do not understand the drive that was there in terms of the passion that fueled my journey into, I mean, from technical aspect into the GRC space that I am now. And you have
Yeah.
mentioned, I mean, I've heard so many conversations as it relates to either getting into cyber or GRC that you do not need to be technical, or having a technical background doesn't really per se make much of a sense. But can
Yeah.
you, I mean, shed some light on that in terms of the value of taking the time to at least have that foundation to be able to execute your duties from a GRC perspective?
You know, I am so glad you mentioned that. That is something, and I'll just share too. My nerdy days back in data centers, I love the white noise. Like when I left the data center, had to go back to the office or go home, I missed the noise of the data center. So I love that as well. But you know, that's interesting. I hear a lot of coaches or cybersecurity career professionals teaching people that it's not necessary to do governance and compliance. It's not necessary to have a technical foundation. Well, I would say that can lead someone astray, because at the root of any assessment or understanding whether a system is compliant, you have to know how the system is supposed to function. You have to understand ports and protocols and services. If you don't understand those things, it's very hard to say to someone that they are using a protocol that can cause a vulnerability, right? So I think what we find is that there's so many open positions in cybersecurity, and the easiest barrier to entry is to go with something that's not technical, right? But when those people get on the jobs, and I've had this experience, they fail miserably because they're pushed into an environment that requires a foundation. Now, I believe there's an opportunity to learn as you enter this space, but those foundations are going to be more important because people are depending upon you as a compliance expert or even a compliance analyst, even entry level, to understand what's happening in their environment so that you can help them make informed decisions. But if you don't know that, then you fail the customer. And I'll give you an example. I've worked with these analysts who come in, no technical experience. They don't even understand networking. So when there is an assessment and they're part of the assessment team, they will interview the customer and with good intentions, and they're going down a checklist and they're going question 1, question 2, question 3. Well, if you answer question 1 and the answer is no, we don't have a SIM tool, then there's no need to delve into question 2 and 3 to ask the details of what that SIM tool is or is not in position to control. Exactly. So that is one of the things that has been brought to the attention of these hiring managers who are so desperate to fill these millions of cybersecurity roles, that they're saying, you know what, we have to take a step back, we have to slow down, and we have to determine whether or not we're getting value by hiring these people. Now, what I've seen them do lately is pair them with a technical person. So, you know, in most cases where companies have already hired these compliance and GRC analysts, they are not performing as expected. So they're pairing them with their technical people. But what does that do to the technical person? It takes them away from their duties. So there's a trickle effect to not having that foundation. And I just think it's unfair to throw people into a situation and not give them the full picture of what is to be expected of them. It's like, you know, they'll sell the vacation, but not the journey to that vacation. And I think that is a problem in our industry, and it's starting to come back on those who are taking those jobs.
That's a very important point that you have actually mentioned, and this is something that I've always tried to advise. I mean, individuals trying to get into the GRC space, and I always look at it to say that GRC, from my perspective, is a mature role.
It is. It is.
It is not something that, not to say that you cannot apply yourself to it. I mean, don't get me wrong for persons who might be listening, but it does pay, as you're saying, rightly say, for example, you're required to maybe establish a GRC program that involves vulnerability management as part of the overall GRC program. But if it is that you don't understand what is a vulnerability, what is how to actually do a vulnerability scan using a particular tool, what it is that you're looking for, having that foundational knowledge in terms of operating systems, servers, networking concepts, cybersecurity principles, then you're definitely setting up yourself for failure. So,
and the team,
the team. Exactly. So based on your background, you say that you were very good at networking, routing, switching. Are you saying that individuals need to be diving deep into all of these technical stuff to be really good at cybersecurity or GRC?
I think they need to understand it, and not even from a certification standpoint, but there needs to be the foundation where they understand what happens, how packets traverse a network, how packets traverse your particular environment. They need to understand how to read an architecture diagram, because an architecture diagram will tell you a lot about the environment. It tells you a lot about the systems, excuse me, and the applications that are in the environment. So if you don't understand the basics of what a endpoint product is supposed to do, it's very difficult to evaluate it. It's very difficult to say to someone, this is not applied appropriately. So I'm not saying that they need to have a background as deep as mine. And the only reason mine was so deep is it wasn't because of the foundation. I need to know it for security. It was because that's what I was doing at the time. And I needed to be good at it to be effective. But I think what we need to do is help people understand that there's a way to do this very affordably. There's tons of information out there. And you have to seek advice from people who have been there. A lot of people teaching how easy it is to get into cybersecurity from in compliance and GRC, that's the only aspect they've had. Some of them have been outright lucky. They were in a position where someone was desperate. They spoke the language enough to get past the interview, and they just faked it until they made it. And that's okay if you're going to continuously grow. So if you get in the door, don't get in the door and stay there. take the gift that you're given and say, hey, I've been given an opportunity. I'm going to get myself in some classes. I'm going to learn this. I'm going to take free classes. I'm going to pay for classes. I'm going to get a mentor, someone who's been here, who's done this work before, and learn from them. I think there's so much opportunity, and I love my industry. So I want to fill these positions too. I want all of us to be able to defend our networks and our environments against our adversaries. I don't want to have this gap forever, but we have to equip people. And that really starts with talking to people who've been there for real. And I don't think everybody is doing that. I think everybody's seeing that there's these are high paying jobs. You can work from home in many cases. Work from home, that has been a driver for many people to enter this industry. But even with that, you're expected to perform. And people are not performing always when they come in and they don't have the knowledge. But there's a way forward to get that knowledge. And I think that's why we're here today. So
Sure.
Happy to hear that as well.
Sure. Know that you're actually online with that. Can you,
Sure.
There are so many times when when you look at these various, job applications, they're asking for many years of experience, XYZ. And the question is, how do I get all of these years of experience, or the sorry, tongue twister there, but getting familiar with those various requirements in terms of tools, these various skill sets. Based on your experience, can you share in terms of how it is that you have been able to garner various levels of experience to match these various job roles?
Yeah, that's an industry challenge that we're all faced with, because they say, hey, we need people. Well, we need you to have 5 years experience. Well, if you're coming straight out of college and you have a degree in cyber, you still don't have 5 years experience. You may have experience, even if it's in an educational environment, if it's in a lab environment. So experience is how you demonstrate what you know. So you can build a lab. There are so many tools that are available to build labs at home using virtual systems. So it costs nothing, if at all, $100 max to build a cybersecurity lab. You test your theories. You look at the labs. You go through the labs. You document it. You understand it. You work in a team. Get with a mentor. Have them review your work and document how you created your lab environment and what you worked in the lab environment, expressing that I don't have work experience yet. I've been working in this lab environment. I've taken these classes, and don't be afraid to say that. I think a lot of times we're conditioned to hear people tell us, just say anything, just say that you have the experience, just say, no, we can't do that, because one, it's a challenge to your integrity. And if you start that way, you'll continue down that path. But I would just encourage people to build out a lab at home, work with a team, get with some of these programs that have these open labs where you can test and you can document what you've learned. And the other thing too is to really buckle down on your study time and go to training. There are, the world is opened back up. There are in-person conferences and workshops. Be familiar with what's going on in our industry. One of the things I do for some of our clients is I interview their cybersecurity candidates, because they don't know what to look for. It's a service that just kind of evolved as we were working with clients, and they said, you know what, we want to remediate all these vulnerabilities that you found, but we don't have the talent to do it. And we don't know what to look for. The last guy we hired, he could talk a good game, but he got in with nothing. And I said, well, that's because you didn't know what to look for. So I began to offer that as a service, and it works. But when you're looking at these candidates, have them explain it and be fair. I would say to every hiring manager, be fair and understand the landscape of where we are in our industry. We have a deficit. We need people. So remember, that the technical skills behind a person is not always as important as who that person is. So get to know the person. If they're willing to build a lab, if they're willing to show you what they did in their lab, if they're willing to say, I will take on an extra project, I'll do research in addition to my job role here, I'll help, give them a shot. If they pass the background, give them a chance to be effective. But don't just say, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You know, one of the things we went through in the industry where we had people interviewing for positions. One person would come in and interview and they would do a great job. They knew the tech, they were good. And they would say, well, I need about a month to actually start. Oh, sure, you're great. We want to hire you. We want to bring you on. In a month's time, someone comes in that was not the same person that interviewed. And then, you know, and there are people who know the tech and they know people. And they were saying, you know what, this is not the same person we interviewed. And they said, no, it's been a long time. Maybe you've forgotten. Well, that's what they were banking on. So these people were getting hired. But when it was time to deliver, they were not the same person that was interviewing and that got that job. So then the industry took a step back and said, hey, listen, we have to stop being so quick to bring people on because we have roles to fill. Ultimately, you're going to be back in the same spot. So there are opportunities for people to grow, but use the free resources and just be honest and be clear about where you are. And, you know, I think we're going to find that hiring managers want good people in their organizations and not necessarily tech robots who know it all, because there are some really great techies. I work with some of the best security engineers every day. Right. They can create a security tool out of thin air. They are really that good. But then it takes people like me and some of the other people on the team who are not as technical in their space today, but know how to deal with the business, know how to speak to leadership, know how to engage the customer, know how to speak in layman's terms. So you need those skills. But if you don't understand the tech, it's very difficult to translate it to layman's terms. So there's a starting point for everyone, I think.
Wow, you've said it in the best way possible. I mean, there are so many areas, there are so many avenues that we could have actually gone into as it relates to this conversation. And the thing is that I am so passionate about having these conversations that at times I try to put a cap on myself to say, okay, all right, calm down now. There's a time limit.
I'm good on time if you are. I can talk cybersecurity all day. I absolutely enjoy it. I love, listen, I have been in this space for over 20 years and I've seen it evolve. And there was a time in my career where I could have gone really far, but I was a mom. I have they're young adult children now, and I have 3 grandchildren. They're wonderful now. But when they were young, I could not do the things that most of my peers were doing in this space to propel their careers forward. So I did what I could. And I stayed engaged. I always stayed involved with IST Square. I always went to the conferences. I always stayed involved with InfraGard. I'm now on the board of InfraGard National Capital Region. And the work that we do to protect our critical infrastructure is important. And it flows down to each and every person that claims this space. So when people ask me to mentor them, my question to them is, why do you want to be in the space? You have to understand who you are first. And that's what I think we have to help people get. We have to understand, are you the type of person that is okay working on your own? Are you okay working with a team? How are you going to feel when someone says your work is incomplete? How do you respond to that? Know yourself first and what you can tolerate. And then I'm able to best direct you into this area of cybersecurity where you will thrive. But that's only because I know a lot of it. And some of the spaces I don't know very well, but I know someone who does. So I think it's very important to understand the full landscape of what we're doing and to help people where they are and not make assumptions that because they have a bachelor's degree in computer science, or even a cybersecurity degree. There are a lot of cybersecurity programs now, and I think it's great. I think we need to do more about putting cybersecurity in the high school. I started the first cybersecurity high school program in 2004, and my colleague said, "Hey, these kids are not going to get it. These are inner city children. They're not going." They did very well. They did exceptionally well with that program. We ran it for 2 years. And I think it's important to understand that we have a generation of young people who want to protect their homeland. And this is an opportunity for them to do that with their creative abilities that they have. We can't box people in. And I think we try to do that by telling them, you need to go into this space, go into this space. This is where the money is. Oh, you can work from home here. But if you're not suited for working from home, don't set yourself up for failure. You know, if you look at your bed and you're going to fall asleep, don't work at home. If I work from home, I'm going to sleep in the day, taking a nap. So I have to get into the office. So I think you have to help people understand that.
Exactly. I mean, you've said so much as it relates to all of those, question points that I would have actually asked you. So you're definitely on point. Now, looking at the various job roles that you have actually occupied, we're talking about being a cybersecurity architect, being a principal security risk management strategist. Just for maybe people who are actually thinking about maybe going into these specific areas, can you say what part do they need to take in terms of what is it they need to learn, or what is it that you do on a regular basis or on a daily basis within these roles? And what is it that they need to understand about these roles, if it is that they want to get into any of these roles that you have occupied before?
Yeah. So I think primarily, let's start with the ones that are most that people are talking about, and that so they can get a clear understanding. The governance, risk, and compliance role, it means different things to different organizations. That's what you have to take away and understand upfront. In the financial services industry, it means that you're always looking at the vendors. You're looking at third-party risk. You're looking at every vendor that the bank has that does business with a bank or an insurance company, and you're evaluating them to see if they're meeting certain compliance regulations. Now, that's for the banking industry. The same thing applies for government systems. So if you're in a government contract, you have to understand the regulation for the government. You have to understand the regulations if you're going to work in critical infrastructure. So I think you have to understand what the laws and regulations are. I think that's why they tell people it's easy to get in, because it's heavily focused on regulations, reading. If you're great with reading, you like to read, you like the law, you like rules and regulations, that's a great space. Even the privacy space is good for that. But it's primarily being able to evaluate a system or an environment, even an application, based on a set of controls. So you're looking at something that says maybe 100 items that say, does your system have this? You have to look at that system and say, yes, it does. No, it does not. What's the remediation plan? So once you have that questionnaire completed, you're working with those people responsible for resolving those issues, and you're pretty much a liaison, and you're saying, how are you going to resolve this? What's the time? So you have to be prepared to chase people down, to sometimes be treated, kind of rudely, because people are trying to get their jobs done. They don't want to stop what they're doing and deal with compliance issues, even though it's important. But the only way that is successful is if senior leadership is on board. So that's the governance, risk, and compliance role. You have to know the regulation. That's not a heavy lift. You can pick up a book, you can read it. There are lots of YouTube videos on it. You don't necessarily need to be certified in it, but you have to understand it and be willing to do the project management that goes along with keeping up with these controls until they're finished. Now, there's an area of cybersecurity. You hear a lot of people are talking about Security Operations Center or SOC analysts. Well, SOCs they're relative to the environment. Some security operations centers are very small. They may have 6 people, then others may have 30. Then others may have security operations center analysts who sit and they look at tools that capture data from all the devices in the network, and it sends it to their computer screen through a console, and it'll sit there and they will look at the screen and they'll get alerts, and they'll take those alerts, and because they know the architecture, they understand what a class A network looks like versus another one. They understand the technology. They can kind of reverse engineer and say, oh, this problem is coming from this segment of the network. This is where the problem is. Let's send a person to resolve it that has access to that network. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you'll find yourself in a loop and not being productive. But what they do, those security analysts, those SOC analysts, they look at screens pretty much all day. In some cases, in a really good SOC that has some funding, they'll have alerts that'll come to you, and they have some automated triage that will kind of help you come up with what the problem is and what the solution will be. But then others are very manual. It really depends. So that is where you have to understand what your level of expertise is, where you're comfortable. Are you comfortable digging in? Then some security operations centers have something called a hunt team. Threat hunt analysts, what they do is they literally hunt in the environment. If you think about a hunter who's actually going out to find something before it gets them, a hunter is going out in the woods to capture a wild animal before that wild animal comes and eats them up. That's what the hunt team does. But again, they know the environment. They know what a threat looks like. They know the behavior of an environment. So then you have insider threats people. So there are people, because we're humans, people make mistakes. People make malicious attacks against the environment, and sometimes they make innocent mistakes that cause attacks in the environment. Either way, those people who work on the insider threat teams, they have to know the environment. They have to know what is normal and what is not normal. And they don't have to memorize that. There are tools that do it. But again, you have to know the tools. So understand that an engineer is different than an analyst. And the funny thing is, because we're in such dire straits to find people, companies are now lumping an analyst with an engineer. So they're trying to get a 2-for-1. It's really unfair, but if people have the skill set, they're doing it. So a security engineer in one environment may be the person who administers a security device. They update the security device. They put patches on it. They build it out. They customize it. In another environment, a security engineer is totally different. In another environment, a security engineer is that person that looks at a problem and says, we need to engineer a solution to fix it using software. So they may write software, they may develop a product in-house to say, we're going to deal with this problem by engineering a solution to develop a fix against it. So those are two different types of engineers. So you have to understand, when people say, oh, you can be a security engineer, it means different things to different people. So those are some of the 4 roles that are primarily talked about today. And people can get in at an entry level, even as an engineer, if you have a college degree. Because in your college courses, you're taught the engineering, you're taught coding, you're taught how to identify threats, especially if it's a cybersecurity program. So I believe if, depending on the path that they've come from to enter the space, there are options, but you just have to understand what that role really means. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Every company is different and every manager is different. They're looking for different things. So somebody sent me something. They said, I have an interview coming up with a major corporation. And here are some of the questions I found online that they may ask me. So I'm going to practice these questions. the responses to these questions. And I said, well, for most of these questions, it's going to be a hard no if you're honest. If you're honest, it's going to be, nope, I've never touched that. Now, how will you, if the same questions are presented, let's work on how you answer them honestly, because they're a hard no, and how you present yourself based on what you have done in the past. So those positions are always evolving. You have to look at them, and it's okay to pick up the phone and ask someone at the company, what does it mean to be a security engineer here, or an analyst, or a GRC person, or a threat intel analyst? So I think there's a lot of homework on the part of the candidate to really research and find out what they're looking for. That's the biggest start.
Awesome. I mean, you have actually encapsulated this perfectly well. I mean, guess what? We're actually down to the last few minutes. So, Robin, I mean, this was indeed a very valuable, value-added conversation. I mean, lots of food for thought. It was my pleasure, I mean, having you, and I look forward to many more conversations like this.
Okay, I'm looking forward to the next article review. I love those. So thank you.
Great. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Great
Guys,
speaking.
I mean, until then, stay tuned, stay connected for all future recordings on the Cyber J.A. show with me, your host, Richie Perry.